The train from New York City to upstate New York is exactly the same amount of time now as it was 100 years ago. We conflated nuclear reactors with nuclear bombs, and then we sort of outlawed the wrong one. And if we had done it the other way around, you never would have heard of global warming. An LLM is not a way to run a robot. You shouldn't let ChatGPT drive you to work. The smartest people in the world always guess wrong about what's going to work in the future.
Hi, and welcome back to The End of Limits, the AI podcast by HUMAIN. My name is Ismail Khoepler, and with me today I have Pablos Holman. Pablos, thanks for being here.
Yeah, hi.
Pablos is a futurist and inventor. He's currently general partner at Deep Future, where he invests in his own words, mad scientists.
Mostly.
Pablos, your resume includes things like crypto in the 90s, AI stock trading in the aughts, building spaceships for Jeff Bezos, mosquito shooting lasers for Bill Gates. So a lot.
Let me put it that way. It sounds a little crazy.
Well, you tell me. I think one umbrella that these all fit under is what you have on your business card, which is a very interesting and rarely used term, I think, inventor. So tell us a little bit about what you mean by that and why you go by that.
Well, I got a unique experience of getting to work as an inventor, which isn't a legitimate career choice for most people. It's hard to find parents who are trying to convince their kids to become inventors. And so at the same time, invention is very important because that is where you get all your new technologies, all your new capabilities for humans to do things in the world. And so I think inventors are sort of a neglected class of humans. And most of them don't have a business card that says inventor. Most of them are, crazy hair and a DeLorean in the garage. And so they're not getting a lot of support. They tend to not be very successful on average because there's a lot of failure-prone work when you're doing new things. But I think invention is where all the action is. So that's where you get your new superpowers for humans. And so these days I back other inventors with the venture fund.
And there's a specific kind of inventor and type of tech, I suppose, that you like to invest in. So one fact that blew me away in your book was the fact that, the tech industry that we talk about every single day is around 2% of the global economy. And your argument is we should be focusing on the other 98%. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so if you add up all the software companies in the world, and that's really what tech has meant for the last couple decades, is software. And software is awesome, and it's generally applicable, and you can use it in, lots of different contexts. And so we kind of need to do that, and that's what we have been doing. But we've also, at the same time, been neglecting all the other kinds of technologies that we could be bringing to life. And so if you think about the tech industry, they add up, their revenue for Google, Microsoft, Facebook, all these software companies combined is about $2 trillion a year. And global GDP is in excess of $100 trillion a year. And if you throw in, NVIDIA's and Intel's and data centers and, maybe support services and stuff, you can maybe get to $5 trillion in the tech industry. But that other, 95% or more, well, that's food, construction, automation, mining, manufacturing, even apparel, and energy, and shipping. And these are multi-trillion-dollar industries that are completely ignored by Silicon Valley. And so when we talk about deep tech, we're talking about bringing new technologies to life that can help us make those things 10 times better, sometimes 100 times better. And by better, I mean, maybe cheaper or cleaner or faster or more humane. There's a lot of room for improvement because most of those industries are a century old or more. So that's what we're trying to figure out how to scale up now, is how do you use the machinery of startups and venture capital, which we built to do new things. It's very successful at doing new things, but steer it and aim it back at some of the bigger problems in the world.
And you and I met a couple of years ago. You've been preaching these sort of crazy, very cool ideas for a while. why do you think they haven't had their time in the spotlight yet? And do you think the AI era would potentially enable that?
Yeah, so a couple things have really brought us to this inflection point. So one of them, if you think about why software has been so successful, it's partly because of in software, the cost of trying something is so low. So you can run a lot of experiments. I think of Silicon Valley as thousands of $1 million experiments. But even within those companies, if you're at Facebook and you're making an iPhone app, you don't have to guess a year in advance or 2 years in advance what's going to sell, what the market's going to want. You can just A/B test. It doesn't cost hardly anything to try something, see if it works, and if it works, you steer your way to success. So that rapid iteration and that basically zero marginal cost of software has made it so possible to just go discover what's going to work. And that is so cheap that it's easy to get drunk on it. That's kind of why the world is so fixated on software. But fundamentally, that's the real superpower. The real superpower in software is it's cheap to try things. And being able to try a lot of things keeps you from having to be so smart and having to guess. The smartest people in the world always guess wrong about what's going to work in the future. So what they do is find a way to run a lot of experiments. So now our computers are so powerful that we can co-opt that machinery to help us with all the other stuff. So great examples of that are now if you're building a Tesla or a rocket or a hypersonic jet, you design it in software, you test it in software, you crash it in software. You do that thousands and thousands of times until you've got the design just right, and then you build one. So SpaceX has to blow up a rocket now and then, but on the whole, they have to blow up a lot less rockets than NASA did. Okay. And so, because they can do most of those explosions in software.
Unless then you guys did.
At Blue.
Yeah.
At Blue Origin, we also have to, blow up a rocket now and then, but that's part of the plan. And a lot of times you're doing it to test your model. You're using that to calibrate and say, okay, was our model accurate? Did we predict this stuff accurately? So those are actually part of the plan. But the amazing thing is you don't have to pay for a whole lot of extra rockets to blow up. It's a few, but not a lot. And so that has changed this kind of conventional wisdom that Silicon Valley has, which is that hardware is hard. That's why it's called hardware. So it is hard, and maybe it's harder than software, but it's not necessarily 10 times harder. Maybe it's only 2 times harder. And now that all the easy stuff has been done, we have a chance to go do these other things that map to much bigger opportunities, much bigger problems. I think of, all these industries as problems to solve. And so that's really one of the biggest drivers of the inflection point.
I think the other thing that comes to mind is the market isn't something that naturally tends to think about the long term versus the short term, right? You have to have a very specific mindset to say, well, I want this to work in 10 years and I'm willing to invest the time and money into that.
Yeah, one of the ways I sort of cheat at, investing in new technologies is I just look out, kind of ask myself on a 100-year time horizon, would we use this new technology or would we keep doing things the way we've been doing for the last 100 years? And a lot of things we do right now, those industries I mentioned, we mostly do the same thing we were doing 100 years ago.
In fact, we're doing it worse. I mean, if I think about travel, for example, cars, planes, it's not any faster. In fact, it's slower than it was before because you have more traffic.
Somebody wrote a book recently about trying to compare the amazing things happening in China to the slightly less amazing things happening in the U.S. And one of the things he figured out was that the train from New York City to, upstate New York or in Connecticut or something is exactly the same amount of time now as it was 100 years ago.
Yeah, that tracks. I used to take the Amtrak from Boston to New York.
Yeah, same. It's not any faster than it was 100 years ago. Even with the Excella or whatever, the faster train, it's faster, but it takes more stops. And so it's not, it still takes 3.5 hours or whatever to get to New York. So
that's really crazy that we haven't, fundamentally altered a technology.
Yeah, and we certainly could. And so when I'm thinking about deep tech, I'm looking at something like that and saying, okay, 100 years from now, is it still going to take 3.5 hours, or could it be faster with this new technology, whatever it is? And then, anybody could do that. 100 years from now, will our cars burn gas, or will they mostly be electric? 100 years from now, will you be driving your car, or will it be self-driving? Anybody could come up with their own answer for that. Usually they'll say, oh yeah, 100 years from now for sure, because on a 100-year time horizon, anything could change. You could develop a technology, you could figure out how to make it cost effective and manufacture it. The government could change their mind on making it okay, all that kind of stuff. So once you have that answer in you, then the question is, does it have to take 100 years, or could we do it in 10? And 10 years is very important because our whole world is sort of built to do 10-year projects. We have 10-year investment funds. People's careers last, they could do a couple 10-year projects. And what's crazy is that a lot of big things have been done in 10 years or less. That's Google, Apple, Microsoft for sure, but also the Hoover Dam, the Apollo program, the Panama Canal, the space shuttle program. All of these things were built in 10 years or less. And when you look around the world right now, it's hard to find projects on that scale. And we presume that it would take forever to do anything that big. Well, I think we're just not being ambitious enough, and we're not working hard enough.
I think maybe one way to sweeten the deal for people is the thing that's risky in software right now is because it's so cheap and easy to iterate, the moat is very difficult to build around that. Whereas in deep tech, potentially you could have something much better.
That is totally true. And the other piece of that is that in software, it's highly competitive. You don't have a technical moat, meaning any iPhone app you can make, I can make. We're all vibe coding together now. So there's not a technical moat in software. And so they tend to take on no technical risk anyway. They're focused on market risk. So all the milestones are things like minimum viable product market fit, things like that. So you're trying to answer the question whether people will pay you for this app or something. Well, we're working on industrial technologies. Like one of our companies has a non-toxic chemical process for separating gold from electronics waste. So those data centers we're building, we cycle the computers out, the circuit boards, every 3, 4, 5 years. Every year, $20 billion worth of gold goes into electronics and then ends up in a gold mine we call landfill. Well, now we can get that gold back. Gold is infinitely recyclable, and it literally defines liquidity. There is no product market fit problem for gold. So you can sell as much as you can get. And that is really, I think, what investors are starting to wake up to and see is that, wow, I'm taking technical risk early on, but the day we get into commercialization, the day we get through the technical risk, we're not taking any market risk. It's just a vast industrial market.
And when we talk about progress on these fronts, and specifically in AI, the 3 sort of enablers or roadblocks are, data, algorithm, compute. Where do you think we are most sort of bottlenecked, and how do you see us moving past that?
Well, right now, I'd say we're running out of data. Now, depending on what you're doing, there's different ways to handle that. LLMs, for example, already trained on all the data that we have that's appropriate, all the written stuff in the world. So you're not going to find 10 times more of that. And then you hear a lot about things like synthetic data, but if you imagine synthetic data for an LLM, what kind of gobbledygook would that be? I can have the computer randomize a bunch of words and then train on them, but that's probably not really going to help. And so it's just very important to keep in mind that, these buzzwords aren't necessarily a panacea. And for lots of things, we don't have good data. For example, in the self-driving cars, we were able to do a lot with synthetic data because you could go make a bunch of examples of, strollers rolling into the street, and the cars could learn to not run them over without having to do it on real strollers, right? So that's a great thing. And in a context like that, you can imagine synthetic data being useful. But for lots of things, we just don't even know. Like biology is a great example. We have terrible data on you and me. Like we don't even know what's in a cell. Like if you open up a cell, it's like an entire city, like Shenzhen in there. It's just everything. It's crazy. There's so much going on in a cell we don't even know. And then you've got all these different microbes in your gut. We don't know what they are. We don't know what they do. We don't know how they interrelate. So until we have that data, the AI is going to be very limited on what it can do. Now, so in that sense, so in things like microbiome, we're data constrained. In things like self-driving cars, it's probably processing is expensive. That's an issue, but it's coming down quickly enough that I don't think we're really going to be held back on that one. With humanoid robots or robots that go into other environments, we're extremely data constrained. So a robot that comes in here is just going to make a lot of great fail videos for probably the next 5 years. It's going to be knocking over cameras and lights, and everything's going to be a mess, and it's going to try to help by picking it up, and it's going to fall over and smash the microphone, whatever. It's just it's got to understand its environment. It's got to do motion planning through it. It's got a lot of difficult things. We really want to do it, and we have a lot of the puzzle pieces to do that now. But without the data, until the robot enters all these disparate environments, a road is not that disparate. A road actually has very simple set of rules that you could use for self-driving. Go, don't go out of the lane. If something gets in your way, slow down or stop. That's probably as a heuristic, pretty good start, right?
Yeah.
And so then you've got like a million edge cases that we're training for. So robots have not even got that. They're trying to figure out, can they climb into the car? Can they open the microwave? Can they put metal in the microwave? There's just a million things they got to learn. So we want to do that. We will do that, but it's very difficult right now because we're data constrained. And then there's also some algorithmic problems there that have to be solved too.
And what about the energy that needs to go into this? So the data centers that need to be powered?
Well, that's actually super fascinating. So even before AI, the world was sort of running short on energy. And there's different ways of looking at that. Part of it is you could say we're certainly running short on energy for most people on Earth because they don't have enough for an acceptable living standard. Now, meaning not enough energy to get clean water and sanitation and those kinds of things. I think we were being disingenuous about that even before AI. People were saying global demand for energy is a few percent more. No, it's like 10 times more. We need to make about 10 times as much energy as we do now to get everyone on Earth up to a living standard equivalent to maybe a European or an American. That's a lot of energy, and we're not anywhere close to doing that. And then AI comes along, and everybody orders all the chips they can get from NVIDIA, and then realizes, well, how are we going to power them? And those chips take a lot of energy. And what's fascinating, there's a couple interesting points. One is that up until the last few years, most of the compute in the world was chips sitting idle. It's sitting in your pocket waiting for a Tinder notification or something. Now, most of the compute is chips in a rack, in a data center, and it's running full tilt 24/7, doing training or inference. And those chips are connected to each other. And so we went from a world that was performing at best combined a couple zettaflops or a couple exaflops of computation. Now we're in the zettaflop world. That means we're doing thousands of times as much computation this year globally as we were last year. And this computation is connected. So it's very important to do. It is extremely energy intensive, There's a bunch of different ways to improve on that, but fundamentally, you just got to make a lot of energy. Now, the way we've been making more energy for the last century is just burning more, burn more stuff. And for some applications, that's really a great, almost miraculous thing to be able to do. So, burning gas in particular has been very effective. It's one of the reasons you and I exist, but it does come with a cost. And so we want to scale up with new forms of energy production that are cleaner, cheaper, and easier to deploy. And so so that's number one. To do that, we have a real problem because in the last decade or so, all the people who cared about this were very fixated on what they call renewable energy, mostly wind and solar. And wind and solar have a couple big problems. Solar panels have two big problems: clouds and nighttime. So the relentless onslaught of night has been literally screwing with our solar panels. We don't know what to do about it. I'm going to stay here tonight and see if it gets dark, but I'm guessing even here where you get a lot of sun, solar panels aren't going to power your data center through the night. So lots of people have been imagining that we're going to come up with a miraculous battery storage system. Where we're going with these data centers is gigawatt scale. There's no gigawatt battery.
A lot of people make the argument, in the US, you have so much land, you could just build so many solar panels.
Yeah, you totally could build more solar panels, but they still don't work at night. And so we're not being honest with ourselves about this, and it really bugs me a lot because, if you buy a chip from NVIDIA, you don't just need it working, till dusk. You need it working 24/7 to pay for itself. So we need these things to go around the clock, and we need to make clean energy that runs 24/7. That's baseload. So we have a couple interesting ways of doing that are coming. You want the wild one or the more practical one?
Both, please.
The most pragmatic one is, in our lifetime in the U.S., what happened is we conflated nuclear reactors with nuclear bombs, and then we sort of outlawed the wrong one. And if we had done it the other way around, you never would have heard of global warming. So that's what's possible. We could have developed nuclear reactors. We could have scaled them up. We could have been making clean energy for electricity and a lot of our needs, save the oil and gas for the things where it's really necessary and important to use it for. But we didn't do that. And so we're living on the wrong fork in history. The nuclear reactors that we do have are the safest, cleanest energy of any kind. They would be the cheapest, except that we keep doing it wrong. So we could talk about that. But the reactors we'll build going forward will be all of those things. They'll be the cheapest energy, they'll be the cleanest energy, and they'll be the safest energy.
What do you mean by cleanest? So how is it cleaner than, say, solar?
The mining footprint of solar, the waste associated with solar. There's a lot of problems people don't want to talk about. The issues with solar panels, they create a lot of environmental damage because, even though you could say Arizona is useless, covering it with solar panels wouldn't make the habitat any better. And then, these things re-irradiate in the infrared spectrum. So sun shining on a solar panel actually contributes more global warming than sun shining on the sand. So we have these kinds of problems. I'm not saying any one of them is specifically catastrophic. Solar panels are a miraculous invention, but they don't work at night. So we have a team that figured out how to make them work at night. And the way they do it is they take the solar farm, they roll it up, stick it on a rocket, and launch it into space. So a solar farm in space will actually get sun 24 hours a day. Because it looks like nighttime because we have a bad angle on it. It's actually noon in space all the time. So a solar panel in space gets 8 times as much energy and then it can beam that down to Earth using radio waves that go right through clouds in the middle of the night. So that's a way of taking this incredible technology, but deploying it in a way that's going to give us the energy we need. So now your solar farm is providing base load energy, and it's not causing any environmental damage on the ground. And then doing that, because we get so much more energy out of it, it'll be cheaper than coal. So, and then you just beam the energy to wherever you need it. You can send it to the middle of Africa or to the North Pole if you want. And so that's what's coming.
That's really fascinating. And just entertain me here, a bit of a digression, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on space and life in space in general in the next 100 years. Because we talk a lot about, using space to our advantage and rockets being sent up there and making everything cheaper. What about life on Earth?
Yeah, well, I think the way to think about it is, Earth is this sort of beautiful and incredible and special, unique thing. We don't have any evidence that there's another one anywhere. So we want to protect it and take care of it as best we can. The long-term vision for something like Blue Origin is really about making it possible for humans to live in space and thrive in space, and maybe turn Earth into a kind of wildlife refuge that you would visit once or twice in your lifetime, maybe, or I don't know, maybe more often. But you wouldn't have all the damaging heavy industries here. You'd do them in space. And that's really what I think is happening in the next 100 years. It's going to take a lot longer than that for humans to have space colonies. But the next 100 years, we could start moving some industries into space. And you can see how we're doing that with even Starlink is an example of that. Starlink is just satellites circling Earth in space, and it basically obsoletes all the trenches we had to dig to lay fiber optic cable across our continents and in between them and under the ocean and all this kind of stuff. And, that was also an amazing thing that humans did. But we're moving on from that. We're moving that industry into space. And there are others. We'll eventually be able to do mining in space. And there's a staggering amount of resources out there, things we value on Earth because they're rare, like platinum metals. Platinum's the most expensive metal you could get like jewelry made of. There's entire asteroids made of platinum and these metals, and we could just go latch onto them and grab as much platinum as we need. I mean, they're estimated, like there's one, I can't remember the numbers offhand, but like there's one asteroid that's kind of a near-term target for mining, and it's projected to be worth like, $4 quadrillion or something, more than the entire GDP of planet Earth for the next 100 years. So it's crazy.
That is insane.
Yeah.
And when we talk about all this, it sounds super exciting, all this progress. Is there anything where you're like, let's be cautious, let's be slow from a consumer protection or even like a geopolitical risk point of view?
Well, look, people fantasize about being able to project and imagine how things are going to go and be so smart and conscientious and thoughtful and plot a course that's very gentle. And there's almost no evidence that works for anything. What actually happens in the world is you got to try a lot of things and then throw out what doesn't work. And so there are contexts where that happens a lot. And I already described Silicon Valley as one of those. We make a lot of startups, a lot of companies. Most of them don't turn out to be so good, and they get wiped out. But that's how we find the winner, and then we run with the winner. Now, there are a lot of other things that we need to be able to do. We need to mature our relationship with those technologies over time. So we're kind of in like junior high with social media, still very immature, not getting the results we want, mostly try to avoid it. AI, we're not in kindergarten yet. We're still at the very early stages. We don't have a mature relationship. We don't actually know what we would regulate if we had the chance. People are just making stuff up. And so I think it's actually irresponsible and immoral to regulate things you don't understand. And in the case of nuclear reactors, as I described, we did it wrong. We were scared ourselves with a story of mushroom clouds, and we outlawed this thing that could have saved us. And I think we're about to, in some cases you can see people are trying to do that with AI. And so the right thing to do is run a lot of experiments, try a lot of different things, get to know these things, learn them, figure out what they're good for, figure out what they're not good for, figure out what's too much, and then regulate against the harms, not the technologies. Figure out what the actual problems are you're trying to stop, go stop those. But trying to regulate a technology into oblivion before you understand it has never worked out well. So I'm not for it.
I think a lot of historical examples are used to try and explain the moment we're living in right now. Everything from the railroad building to the dot-com bubble to Sam Altman comparing it to the Renaissance and the Manhattan Project. So I'm curious what you think, if there's any sort of similar moment in history we're living through.
Well, I do think each time we get a meaningful technology advancement, that's a evolutionary step for humans. I don't think we're good at them. Whoever invented the wheel was probably assassinated. And then for several generations, we probably killed everybody who had a wheel until some kids were like, Dad, wheels are cool. Stop. And now we have wheels. And so there's just this kind of, you got to think of it as a developmental process and a life cycle you have to go through, and you can't skip those steps. And so I tend to focus on what's the potential for these technologies, what future could it help us to build that we want. But that's not popular, and that's because the scary stories sell better. And so, Hollywood needs a boogeyman to sell a movie, and every time we get a new technology, that becomes the next scary thing. And so people get these stories in their head, and it controls their behavior. So I think it's important to learn to manage that instinct. You have to learn, and one way to do that is to look historically and say, okay, wheels on the whole have worked out. For centuries or probably millennia, hammers were probably used to smash heads more than they were to build homes. Well, eventually we developed a mature relationship with those things. Now we build more homes with hammers, and it's a really wonderful thing. And so we kind of want to look for those opportunities and try to figure out how can we craft a more mature relationship with these technologies and use them for what they're good for. And people have to take responsibility for this stuff at some point. There's I think a lot of the problem we have right now is everybody wants to blame somebody else for their problems, and they don't want to take responsibility for developing a mature relationship with social media or with AI or with robots or with anything else. But that's just, no matter how much you don't like that, it's still going to be this way. Like, we have to be honest with ourselves that we have to take responsibility and learn to use these technologies and build the future we want.
And looking at that from not just an individual responsibility play, but sort of national responsibility, you have AI is almost becoming a national imperative to have, your own functioning model. So HUMAIN is Saudi's stake in the ground. The US has several companies. China has several companies. Europe is Europe. So how do you see these companies or these countries converging on sort of some sort of model of, cooperation or even in competition? What do you think that looks like?
I think that what we need is a multitude of AIs. There is a bunch of attempts to build the one AI to rule them all. And there is only one case for that, one way to accomplish that right now, which is to try to get so far ahead on compute resources that you can kill off all your competition. And so there are attempts to do that. I think it is unlikely to succeed for a couple reasons. One, the types of models we have now, even a multimodal LLM, these models are terrible for almost everything. They're actually even terrible at language. And we know that because your brain does language better than an LLM on 20 watts. So there is some algorithm that's better for doing language than the LLMs, but we haven't discovered it yet. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. I think that what we will end up with very soon is a world where people stop sharing their algorithmic advancements, and you'll end up with a lot of black boxes. Those black boxes, and even companies we invest in, I advise them, I'm like, yeah, don't file a patent. Don't make software that you ship. You make a web service, we run it on our computers. People can send their data, we send results, and we don't tell them how, but it's astounding, right? That's how you want to do these things because because we don't have a IP environment that would protect algorithmic advancements very well. That's been a complete failure. The academic heritage of a lot of this work made it open source, so that's why you see some healthy competition right now. We all have the same algorithms. You and I could build a chat GPT ourselves. We have the same algorithms they do. They have a head start, smart people and stuff, but we could do it. So, and many have now. So that's the real future here lies in a couple things. One, proprietary data sets, and especially for like real-time data, there's no way around that. It doesn't matter what your synthetic traffic data tells you. It's the real traffic data that matters. So, having a data mode of some description really matters. And I think you'll see that in a lot of industries. And that game is going to get played out over the next few years as everybody starts to figure out how to cinch down on their own data assets. So that's one. And then second, there's going to be algorithmic advancements. We're going to, right now we've sort of overdone it on deep learning, and deep learning is great, but that's not the end all. A lot of the data we deal with, even traffic, this is time series data. This is a kind of data that these deep learning models have no concept of. It doesn't know the difference between, words written by Shakespeare and words written by me this afternoon, or words written, 2,000 years ago. So there's just no concept of time. And look at like the stock market. So that's time series data. You're not going to use an LLM to trade on tick data on a stock market. So we have to create new AI algorithms that are appropriate for all the kinds of things we do. An LLM is not a way to run a robot. People are certainly trying, but
is the solution could it be not just new data, but rather a longer context window, so more memory?
No. I mean, that helps with a lot of things, but it doesn't help solve this fundamental problem that it's just the wrong kind of model for what we're doing. So I think those things will shake out in different ways. I don't expect the models to be as open as they are now going forward as far as algorithmic approaches. So you're going to end up with proprietary models with proprietary data sets. And it's kind of what you want. You want a multitude of AIs competing with each other. You shouldn't let ChatGPT drive you to work. Like, it will happily try, but it has no idea how to get there. And, Google Maps knows how to get there. You've been using Google Maps. That's an AI you've been using every day for 15 years, and it knows how to plot a course to work, and it knows more than you do. It knows where the traffic is. It knows how to route around it. It knows where construction is. It can route around it. So that's an appropriate, it's not an LM, it's not a deep learning model, but it's a model of the traffic and the roads. So that's the way to do that kind of thing. And then, you should probably not let it drive the car. ChatGPT would happily try to drive your car if you let it. Put it in a little MCP server in your car and it'll try and drive it. No, do not let it do that. It is absolutely not the right kind of model for driving a car. Tesla and Waymo have models for that are trained on driving, and they're very good at what they do. Do that.
So a bunch of specialist models rather than a
Yeah, and they should compete. Right now you can see even the self-driving cars, Waymo and Tesla are kind of competing to see who can make the best model with different classes of data.
So when we talk about all this really amazing, interesting technology, is there any part of it that seems risky to you, whether it's from a consumer protection or even from a geopolitical point of view?
Well, I think there's risk in how people use these technologies. You will end up with it is a war of escalation. People are trying to get a hold of these things because they see the power in them. But I don't think you can blame the technology for that. You got to blame the people. So, wars of escalation are dangerous games not to play. You can't win them, but you can definitely lose by not playing. And so I think that what's happening now is you see a lot of different angles on this, and people are trying to get in a position, and some people are able to spend a lot on compute and really charge ahead, and we don't know for sure that they're going to end up with a protectable moat of some kind, but they're going to try. And I think it, will play out in a different way. I think ultimately we end up with a multitudes of models in the same way that we have multitudes of people and companies, and there is no one big right one. There's temporary moments in time when a monopoly can subsist for a while, but they tend not to, these empires don't last forever. And so, Facebook and Amazon and Google and Microsoft, all of them will be challenged, and that's how it plays out over time. So
I think one thing that concerns me in all of this is the human element. So the agency that humans have had with technology, I think, especially with social media, has been eroding in recent years. And with AI, I see a real risk of that depleting quite quickly. So how do we stay in charge?
Well, I think the agency still lies with humans. Now they've gotten out of the habit of taking responsibility for that. So they want to blame Facebook for all their problems or, blame someone else. But we all chose to use these things. You probably can't remember ever writing a check to Facebook, and you've been using it every day for decades. So I think the way these things play out is we have to, over time, start to recognize that it's up to us, to not use the things we don't like or use them less or find something better and make choices. And we made a lot of poor choices. That's why we're here where we are. If you don't like what Facebook is doing, and I get it, it's because you made a poor choice and stuck with Facebook instead of choosing to use RSS or some other alternative, So we have a way we have the technologies we need to steer out of these walled gardens and into a position where we can have more agency in crafting the way we use these technologies in our lives. We have all those tools. Most people, there's an open source version of everything. Now nobody wants to use it because they want to take the easy route, the free route, the cheap route, the one that gives you the dopamine drip. So, but that's still human agency at play.
So what is your call to action then for people who not necessarily are capable of deep tech expertise, but they still want to feel useful and have agency in their lives?
Well, I think what a good thing for people to do is recognize that these are tools for us to build the future that we want, and you can have a part in that. So learn to use them as tools. That's true for every technology. It's true for coding. It's true for AI, even Instagram. So, but have that kind of relationship where you think about what do I want? What's the outcome I want from this? And am I getting it? And then you can choose how to steer that. So, for example, the way I think about it, you shouldn't give your attention to anything that seeks you. That's what those algorithms are doing. Save your attention for what you seek. So when you open your computer or your phone, close your eyes and for a split second think, what am I interested in? pick anything in the world and then put that into Google or put that into YouTube. It's an amazing world. It's a resource that's vast, and you can learn about anything in the world, but you got to steer. You got to be in the driver's seat. Don't go to the Reels screen or the For You screen where they just feed you crap. That's you being, sedated. That's you giving up your agency. That's you giving away your attention. Your attention is what's valuable. So you want to be in the driver's seat with your attention. And that's a way to get, I think, a better handle on how to use these tools. One cool thing about AI is so far, it has mostly been in that mode. You sit down, you think of what you want, you write a prompt. And that's pretty cool. And I think it's this kind of fleeting moment. Any day now, they'll figure out that they can just automatically write prompts for you and just stop.
I mean, I think even in recent versions of models, you notice now that they always have a follow-up question for you. Like, would you like me to phrase this a different way? Or would you like me to look into this? Creating almost like a real page.
There you go. And eventually they'll figure out how to make the TikTok version of this where you can just sit back and eat chips and, drink something out of a big cup and forget about it.
Very American.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think that's where it starts. And then, recognize this is a toolkit for us to build our future. So what future do you want to build? Do you want to build, who really wants to build a fintech app? I mean, come on. Most people have no idea what that is. That is the biggest cop out in the world. No offense, great fintech out there. Good luck with that. But think about what you want to create. You want to create a life, a family, a community, some friends. You want to have some fun. You want to do something meaningful. You want to help people out. So figure out how you're going to do that. And these, you may or may not use computers or at all, but that's what's possible. And the free time that you get, because the computer is doing all the menial, boring, dangerous, repetitive stuff, now you get some free time. You got to go watch Game of Thrones, again. But once you're done with that, then use that free time to go build something you want. And I think the way I think about it, a good example of this in my life is, I have a daughter, and when she was in school, there'd be 30 kids in her class and one teacher. We'd always complain that, the student teacher ratio should be lower. And some years we'd get it down to 28-1. But at the same time as that was happening, for the last 15 years, there's headlines about self-driving trucks putting truck drivers out of business. I don't know anybody who actually wants to be a truck driver, and even less people who want their kid to be a truck driver. So we have 100,000 open truck driver positions in America right now. So we're complaining that we don't have enough teachers and that we don't have enough truck drivers and that they're going to be put out of work. But why not just let the self-driving truck take over that job, moving Happy Meal toys around, and then have the truck drivers go be teachers? That's possible. We're not being honest with ourselves. This goes back to agency. We're not being honest with ourselves about using these tools for the things that we say we care about. And so I would trade any of my kids' teachers for a displaced truck driver and a 1-to-1 student-teacher ratio. That will be missing.
I think the personalization is something AI could potentially help with, but you do need that human element of a person to encourage them and teach them.
Well, we're evolved to have relationships with people. And so the AIs might get better at acting like people, but they will not be people. And I think that you should use them to help you if you need it. Maybe it could be helpful, make you feel smarter, more informed, help you get over some anxiety, things, whatever it is that it can help you with. But think of that as a tool to help you get prepared to go hang out with real people and do that. That's what we're evolved to do. And we thrive when we feel that we are meaningful and useful to other people.
And to be useful to other people, you need to create something useful. So,
well, some people aren't built for creating new things. You might still be just developing a craft or a skill, but you want to be able to connect the dots and see how the thing that you do matters. And if you can't see how what you do matters, then you're going to end up with lots of profits. And we see that a lot now.
To end on Pablos, I wanted to ask you, what is, we talked a lot about different crazy, fun technologies you guys are investing in and working on. What's one that you are very excited about in the near term?
Yeah.
Applied?
Well, I wrote about a lot of them in the book. It's meant to be a fun book that anyone could read, and so far it's working out very well. You like it? Okay, good. But the one that matters the most to me, going back to what we were talking about before, is I had worked on this nuclear reactor in 2007, where we were trying to make a nuclear reactor powered by nuclear waste. And we aren't allowed to build it. So for 17 years or whatever, it's been regulated into oblivion because the U.S. had no way of approving any advanced reactor technology. But recently I invested in this company that figured out how to take a pressurized water reactor, which is the kind we have in the U.S. We have 94 of them. That is old technology. They made a new design that's about as big around as that table. And it can be buried a mile deep in a borehole. And so when they do that, it's a way to make a nuclear reactor that is unquestionably safe. There's 10 billion tons of rock between the reactor and anyone's backyard. And so that reactor is super safe. But what's great is it's also very simple. We can build it in a factory like a Toyota. It's not much bigger than a Toyota, not more complicated than a Toyota. And so we can take that reactor, make thousands of them in a factory, which gets economies of scale up, get the price down. And then we can take them all over the world and put them in the ground. And we have a whole industry that's real good at drilling holes in the ground. So I think we can scale this up very quickly. And to me, that's the most exciting thing, the most important thing to do. If you solve energy, you can solve a lot of other problems for free. And this reactor will be profitable on day one. We were working to get the first one deployed in 2029. The Department of Energy is pushing the company to do it by July. And so the company's called Deep Vision. They're approved by the Department of Energy to deploy the first reactors at commercial sites in July. And once those things go live and we can show it's all working, then we'll make thousands of them in a gigafactory and they can go everywhere.
That's really exciting and refreshing to see someone who sees sort of these almost science fiction-y ideas as something positive and not pessimistically.
Yeah, I don't really read science fiction. I think that there is certainly some good science fiction, but a lot of these folks are largely useless. If you're so creative, let's hear some positive, practical visions for the future instead of just more stories about how the world ends and robots turn us into paper clips and all this kind of stuff. We could recognize that these are tools. We have built the best toolkit in the world. We have the most advanced toolkit in the world. We have the most smart and educated people in the world. We have the most experience, the most of everything. And we're going to use that to build our future. And so this is ours to lose. Like, we totally get to build the future here. So if we should be building an awesome future. There's nothing we don't have that we need to do that. And we just need to get out of our own way and do it. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Let's do it. Thanks for being here, Pablo.
Yeah, thank you. This is fun.